Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the European VC podcast. Today, I'm joined by Sandeep of Prosus Ventures. I will just tell you, this is the biggest deep dive we have yet done on marketplaces and how the world of marketplaces is being disrupted by AI, where we can expect the industry to go from here, as well as a ton of deep dives on individual companies and how they are managing the transition into an AI-driven world. So with no further ado, I will just invite you to enjoy this episode that is all about AI marketplaces.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. This episode comes to you by the support of our partners. Portfolio IQ by Synaptic. Portfolio IQ is the most effective way to track your portfolio. It pulls data from all sources, board decks, financials, MIS sheets, forms, emails, everything, and creates a true single source of truth for your portfolio data. With Portfolio IQ, you can track all the metrics that matter, not just the standard metrics. All metrics are reviewed by a team of certified accountants. You'll get 100% accuracy. Not sure about a number? Just click on it to see the exact cell in the document it came from. Portfolio IQ also adds a layer of standardization to make the data comparable and useful for benchmarking, valuations, and reporting. All of this is as simple as forwarding an email. Zero added work for your fund or your portfolio companies. Portfolio monitoring that you'll fall in love with. Go to synaptic.com/portfolio IQ. That's synaptic.com/portfolio IQ. The good folks at Synaptic will be happy to give you a no-cost trial.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Sandeep, welcome to the European VC podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as I just told you, I will read out your bio now, and then I'll let you comment on this and add a bit of context. You're head of European investments at Prosus Ventures. Your fund size is non-existent, so we'll talk a bit about that. But you have more than 100 billion in AUM. You're headquartered in Amsterdam, focusing on early stage globally, and you've done some incredible investments, counting Delivery Hero, iFood, OLX, I don't know how to pronounce that, Bilt Rewards, Corti, Superside, Avant Arte, and Oxford Ionics probably. Did I get that somewhat correct?
Oh, 100%. You got it completely correct. So, let me first touch on the AUM point, which is somewhat unique, but there are other folks that exist out there. So we're a publicly traded company, and our AUM, so to speak, is our market cap. So if people want to, and anybody could buy and sell shares in Prosus, we're the largest listed tech company in Europe. And we're listed on the Euronext Amsterdam. And what that means, the way that our structure works is that we invest for the long term. So we don't have to, return capital in a traditional GP LP type structure. And the way it works is that we believe that the value of our investments will be reflected in our share price. And one similar way to think about us is a Berkshire Hathaway is a decent example. Other people in Europe that also exist with similar structures that are publicly traded. Kinnevik is another example of firms that exist like that. But that's our size and and the way to think about us.
Let's dive into the deep end. Let me ask you a question, because you said it very well. Our belief is that the value of our investments will be reflected in the stock price. But typically, VC investments, at least the early stage investments, often don't come in with a multiple like we're seeing when you're allowed to kind of set that valuation yourself and put it to your LPs in the reporting. Rather, it's often discounted when it's public. How have you seen that for Prosus? How do you navigate it? Maybe some thoughts on that could be interesting.
An organization of our size and scale, some of the earlier stage investments, they only become truly meaningful once they're at scale. So I think that's where it becomes, and as companies get, later and later stage and they start to get closer to IPO, they will start getting closer to being comped on public market multiples. And that's kind of the way that we think about it. I think the way for us is that, of course, when we're pricing investments in venture, pricing is very important. It's important to ensure that you're being adequately compensated for the risk that you're taking. But we do believe that, the companies that we're investing in because we believe that they can be truly generational companies. We think that they can become really, really massive. And that's kind of the way that we think about it.
I'm ready to bet my hat on that you don't have 100 billion earmarked to early stage in Europe. So could you tell us a bit about how big is that pie?
Yeah, so the way that we think about it is that so we've got round about kind of $15 billion in cash that's sitting. So 100 billion is kind of our market cap. We've got $15 billion sitting in cash. And, Prosus Ventures, we invest globally, right? A few $100 million every year into, early stage startups. We do a lot in India. We do invest in Southeast Asia, Europe. Of course, we're active and we're writing checks, but we try and maintain a cadence of, leading or co-leading or following in a few rounds, at least in Europe, throughout the course of the year.
Okay, very cool. At the early stage, how much do you do at the later stage? Do you follow on all the way to IPO?
Yeah, so I think the way that we think about it is that we evaluate every investment round independently, and it all depends, right? Is that there's no set as to whether or not we will, but if we feel like every round is attractive, we have the ability and the flexibility to maintain our stake, follow on to IPO, and also in some situations, not often, and it doesn't have much to do with my day-to-day, but also in some situations we can buy in IPOs as well.
And your team specifically only does early stage as the first entry ticket. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Very cool. So now let's now you said you wanted to start on the AUM part. We just dived into that. Were there other parts around this introduction of you that you'd like to just touch on?
No, I think it's important probably for the audience to listen. One of the big things that I get often when I'm explaining kind of Prosus, people have heard of us, but they're like, for $100 billion organization, what should I send your way? What are interesting deals? What are the kind of deals that you're looking at? So let me reframe, given the fact that we've spoken about so many things, let me reframe where I'm spending most of my time and my team are spending most of their time so we're sector agnostic, we're stage agnostic. We do have a strong focus on kind of AI for commerce, AI for marketplaces, which again we'll talk a little bit more about briefly, which we're very excited about. But we have invested in, we can invest in fintech. We've obviously mentioned Oxford Ionics. We can do some hardware, but it's not that often. But we're fairly broad in kind of what we can look at. Typically speaking, we're writing checks of anywhere between $5 to $20 million in the early stage. So that's kind of our typical early check size. We don't typically do seed. We can, but typically we don't do seed. I would say we would do Series A. A's and B's are the most common. We can do C's as a first check. We can do seed, but yeah, that's typically Series A, Series B, 5 to 20 million check sizes is kind of how best to think about us.
So this is where the American accent shines through, because early stage, most people in early stage say, okay, that's seed and Series A when they call themselves early stage investors. But okay, you're Series A, B, and sometimes C, which is not uncommon to have considered to be like growth stage-ish.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, for an organization of our size, we also have a team that focuses on growth investments, which is kind of Series C and beyond as well.
It is in US context, right? And the real nomenclature about venture, but it's just so typical. That's why I point this out. It's so typical to hear we do early stage, and what you mean is you do seed. So that's why I'm just redefining, making it very clear.
Yeah, perhaps the names and the nomenclature have gotten muddied over the years. I think the way that I think about it is that we're looking for businesses kind of post product market fit that are scaling, where they have real customers or consumers that we can talk to, and that's where I typically get really excited.
Yeah.
One other thing that is important to cover. So we are just from an investment perspective, we are not looking for we're not a CVC, right? So that's, I think, also important to understand for the audience, where we don't look to underwrite, synergies with existing businesses, or not looking for any special rights. So we're just long-term patient capital, which I think is an important distinction to make for the audience.
CVCs have beautiful power, but they also definitely have some drawbacks, and there are things you want to think about seriously before engaging. Okay, so let's go directly into the deep dive that I just announced just before. And that deep dive, of course, is a vertical one, focusing on the role of AI in the marketplace's landscape and how it has evolved over the past decade. I don't know almost where to start on this, because, I kind of feel like every single episode these days is kind of like, how will AI disrupt your sector? How will AI disrupt your sector? But I think it's super important. So let's get into it. Maybe start at the bottom where we, what has happened over the past decade. Let's start there.
It's interesting, before hopping on to our call today, I just went back. Are you familiar with the website Craigslist?
Yes, I love Craigslist back in the days.
Exactly.
Well,
now,
I actually, so to be fair, I only know Craigslist from all the movies where it's constantly referenced, but I know
sure.
Craigslist.
So, I a long time ago, I used to live in New York, and I remember buying and selling things on Craigslist. And if we think about, just as a simple anecdote, the evolution of marketplaces fundamentally, and Prosus itself has been investing in marketplaces for a really, really long time. They started off with, very basic websites, kind of like Craigslist still is today, and where people will list things and people will buy things. And that's the beauty of network effects, and more buyers, more sellers, and then it just becomes a virtuous cycle where things become really, really large. And if we just think about the evolution of marketplaces from what Craigslist was back then, and kind of to some extent still is today, and how powerful that is, to food delivery marketplaces such as, Delivery Hero, which you mentioned, iFood, which is a business that we have in Brazil, which is the largest food delivery platform in Brazil, Deliveroo here, we have in the UK, Wolt, where we were invested, which sold to DoorDash. The evolution of marketplaces is something that we found to be just so interesting. And while we think about how AI is going to impact it, one of the things that I am really encouraged when I talk to founders, especially incumbent founders, is there is so much value in the data that exists in the marketplaces, because you think about, these are these large platforms where if you're tracking correctly, you can understand this. One of the big things that we all talk about, right, is the value of data, and marketplace data, especially when it comes to like individuals. You have the ability to see what people are ordering, how they're paying, what they're searching for, how they're looking for it. And just the evolution of that is something that I find really interesting. Now, if we think about where we have found, we've deployed capital, and so we have OLX, which is the leading online classifieds platform in many, many countries in the world. We've got a number of food delivery investments. We've got Avant Arte, which is an art marketplace that's global, but that's based here in London. We've got Superside, which is a creative services marketplace. So we've seen a lot of these businesses that exist, and how using and leveraging online platforms to bring buyers and sellers of a variety of services has really evolved over time. And we're seeing more and more vertical specific marketplaces that have existed as people have become more accustomed to shopping and buying online. We've just seen that evolution, and there's just a ton of there's tons to go on. So I think what would be interesting is, talking about maybe some specifics. I think that's typically what people find interesting, and just thinking about, how in specific areas we found some of these AI type solutions that have augmented some of these businesses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we should start, the most obvious place is probably operational efficiencies that you can imagine coming from AI. I'm seeing it as a content developer. I think we were probably some of the first ones to be truly hit by it, because we're creating new stuff all the time. So we don't have legacy data that we need to tie into as much. And we're producing things every single day. And it's obviously very well positioned for LLMs to be valuable. So we basically, we could do a lot of operational efficiency development when we first saw ChatGPT come out, and it's only taken off since then. So, but in the marketplace context, tell me, where are the operational efficiencies? Where you're seeing it being difficult? Where you're seeing the large opportunities being there?
Yeah. So if we think about, so it's a great question. Something that we think about a lot, right? What in the existing workflow can we make better, make easier for the customers? And so let's take iFood, which is our food delivery business in Brazil, for an example, and let's just segment it into the various stakeholders and the various constituents that are involved in the process. So if we think about customers, so we've had operational efficiency. So we have AI now providing personalized food recommendations that enhance that will, you go on there and they're like, hey, Andreas, you used to buy, you like to get salads for lunch. Have you tried, this restaurant? That's one area where we've seen ton of efficiency because it allows the customer a more joyous experience because it gets them to what they're looking for quicker. There are chatbots that we've rolled out, which, one of the biggest questions that comes across most of our food delivery platforms is, where is my food? Right? And allowing the customer to have better insight into where their food is through a seamless chatbot type experience really improves their satisfaction. The second constituent we think about is drivers. And one of the things also that I want to talk about is when we talk about AI and we talk about operational efficiency, we're not just talking about generative AI, right? Which is, of course, I will also talk about how we are using generative AI in some of our portfolio companies, or how portfolio companies are leveraging generative AI to make customer experiences better. But just, as we talk about operational efficiencies, going back to what you mentioned, when we think about drivers and riders as constituents, using AI to ensure that delivery routes are optimized and schedules are optimized so people are going and making drops at the right places so that they're able to be efficient with their time, it allows them to respond dynamically and, again, improves their satisfaction. For the overall platform, we have demand forecasting, fraud detection. So these are all ways that we're increasing operational efficiencies. And then the big question comes about is like, okay, so what metrics do you use to kind of determine success? How do you determine success? And, talking about iFood specifically, they've hit a milestone of delivering more than 100 million orders in August. Their cost to deliver has been reduced by close to 20% while increasing customer satisfaction. Those are real tangible efficiencies that we've seen, and something that we're incredibly proud of.
Yeah, I saw another stat in the show notes, and everyone can go there to read this, in detail. But you also iFoods have seen a 30% reduction in customer reacquisition costs, which is quite mind blowing. So absolutely powerful. Could you tell me a bit about the generative AI in this side?
Yeah, of course. So I think generative AI, actually, one good example is a European portfolio company of mine that I'd love to highlight, it's called Superside. And Superside is a vertical marketplace for design services. And historically, so they work with some of the largest companies in the world: Amazon, Google, Coca-Cola, Facebook, etc. They work with some of these incredibly large businesses. And typically what they were doing there, the company is fully remote, but the founders are based in Oslo. And they were finding world-class design talent that were in geographies like South Africa, Costa Rica, and giving them access to work on brands such as the ones that I mentioned, and helping these brands turn around their design content in record amount of time, all at a fraction of the cost. Now, if we think about some of the innovation that's happened in generative AI, Superside now has, I think, over 250 of their design professionals, again, and it's a managed marketplace. So Superside sits as an overlay with some of these designers. They've got over 250 of their designers trained in using all of the AI tools that we've come about for copywriting, for image generation, which has allowed their customers to iterate on their content. So for example, Vimeo is a customer of theirs. And if Vimeo wants to put out a new advertisement in 50 different countries, for them to roll out that collateral across all the languages, across all the platforms, they have the ability now to do that significantly quicker. So that's another area where we're seeing a lot of use of generative AI and incredible efficiency.
Can I ask you about kind of abstraction on that business, because it's clearly it's a service model, right? Where you help
Yes.
develop, an AI. What I've seen is that just as with any tech, larger players are incredibly slow to adopt, which leaves a big opportunity in the hands of those that move quick, especially if you then have a monetization opportunity on the fact that you move quicker than everyone else, because your margin has just exploded. I'm seeing that. Like, I hope my sponsors are not listening to this episode, right? But I've seen that I can deliver in much less time the same product that I delivered before in terms of content that promotes them, right? And I can eat the margin there, right? Because they still get what they wanted, but I just spent much less time on it. And I imagine that that's exactly what this team is seeing as well, right? How durable do you see that? How sustainable what's the route for a company like this that exploits, so to say, that arbitrage opportunity that there is between being the quick and slow responders or adopters of AI?
Look, I think that there's a couple components here. I think for Superside specifically, one of the biggest questions that a lot of the companies that they work with ask them is like, hey, could you actually help me understand of all of these tools? Because if you think about it, we're in the venture world and we see startup after startup that are coming out that are rolling out tools that are incredibly exciting. But if you're a corporate and your job is not to kind of assess startups every day, and you're a large corporate, you don't actually even know what tool to use. And especially to your point, because sometimes they can be somewhat, just by virtue of their size, it will take them, they're not as nimble as a small organization. They're asking companies like Superside, hey, actually, which tools should I use? That's one question. The way that I think about anytime that there is an arbitrage, when people talk about kind of arbitrage opportunities, I like to come back to first principles. Who is your customer? And in Superside's case, their customer are the creative teams at some of these large organizations. And are you able to deliver them a product and service better, faster, cheaper than anybody else in the market? And as long as that becomes true, as long as that continues to be true, they'll continue to be successful. I think that there will continue to be new forms, there will continue to be new tools that come out, and the onus is upon the startups to really ensure that they're adopting these tools, because the core thing that a lot of that company like Superside has is the relationship and the trust of the end enterprise that actually, because that takes a while to build, right? And that's to use your language, that's not something that's easily exploitable by others, because building up trust and the ability to really rely on a startup or a scale up is not something that is very easily done and comes with time.
We also spoke about OLX, and I know that they're doing some interesting stuff in terms of AI and search and discovery. Maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, so OLX is one of the largest classifieds businesses out there, and we were talking about classifieds earlier on, and one of the big things that we have felt about classifieds business is that what we want to ensure is you allow users to find what they're looking for quickly by understanding their needs and providing relevant search results. And one of the things that they're doing is that they're offering personalized suggestions. One really cool thing, the really cool feature that they rolled out is picture search. Like, for example, you've got a really nice microphone over there, and if I showed up in your office and wanted to be like, hey, like, I really like Andreas's microphone, I'd love to buy one. Or one day you're like, I've used this microphone a lot, I'd love to sell it. For you to basically take a picture, put it online, either find whether or not somebody else is selling it, or understand what the price for that should be, whether or not it's selling for. Those are all tools that we're rolling out. So really aiding in the search discovery process to improve user engagement are some of the things that OLX is focused on, which we're really excited about.
There's so much we could talk about, but maybe one thing I just want to ask you before we go to the how marketplaces in Europe are evolving versus the rest of the world, because you have a global perspective. I'd love to just ask you, and it's actually quite connected. this is talent that's super deep tech, so to say. Even though it's it's still pure digital, it's definitely more complex than the old SaaS model, which you might say that some of the tech that was behind the marketplace wasn't necessarily as heavy as it is today. Are you seeing this being a big limiting factor on the growth of these companies and their ability to execute their visions, the access of talent?
One of the things that we found for the more talented individuals is they want to work on really interesting projects, right? That's one thing. And, we at Prosus we have a phenomenal AI team here that we actually built out many, many years ago, maybe over 5 years ago. And one of the things, touching back on what I mentioned earlier, is the thing that's really cool about the incumbent marketplaces that they're actually sitting on data. So it actually allows the folks to really have the foundational building blocks to iterate and try some of these newer technologies, which is really unique. That's something that's really unique, where because the data, the data that you're getting from a lot of these marketplaces is truly proprietary, right? And that provides for really exciting and interesting opportunities for folks to work. Now, that being said, is it really hard to attract and retain the best talent? Of course, right? But we think that we're doing a pretty good job of that.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Very cool. Okay, so now let's widen the lens a bit and say Europe versus the other regions. Are there any things about how we are developing in the AI marketplaces space versus the others, or we're all basically moving alongside each other?
Yeah, so I'd probably split it into two lenses. One is kind of marketplaces in Europe versus other parts of the world. And then the other is AI tools that are coming from Europe that are serving marketplaces all over the world. And we'll touch on both.
Yeah.
Now, I think when we look at businesses, when we look at marketplace businesses in Europe, I think the two things that come across really strongly is one, Europe has a very strong lens on sustainability, which actually makes for, C2C, so consumer to consumer commerce, really exciting and attractive. It's not a Prosus portfolio company, but a very large company in that space is Vinted, right? Which is, is very much focused on sustainability. And then the other aspect that is also the case in Europe, given, cross-border, multiple different geographies, the different tax regimes is trust. And I think that Europe leads in trust and sustainability as it pertains to marketplaces. India is a really interesting market for us. We've been investing there for over a decade. And given the sheer number of people that are going online in India, the e-commerce marketplace, the e-commerce landscape has just expanded. And people there are, shopping mobile first. So we're seeing a lot of really interesting innovations where there are traditional commerce type businesses that are being blended with access to mobile first, which has been really interesting. And one of the areas that we found interesting to deploy capital, this is in Southeast Asia, is the area of B2B commerce, where, we've spent a lot of time. B2B marketplaces are areas we spent a lot of time, because one thing that's interesting is if you're a small and medium business owner that's presumably been passed down generation to generation, you're expecting a Amazon type experience or like a B2C type experience when you make B2B transactions.
Yeah.
And as you inherit, either inherit a business or you start a business, and you recognize that a lot of these have been done based on kind of prior handshake type deals, and it's, you don't have access to pricing or inventory. Those are areas which we found really exciting. And, one business of ours is ShopUp, which is in Bangladesh, where they've built a full stack B2B commerce platform, just allowing people to trade a lot of like regular home goods that are being bought from mom and pop stores online. that's one area that we're finding really interesting, which we haven't really seen in Europe. It just doesn't, that hasn't really translated, that type of business model. Yeah, social commerce is another area where people in Southeast Asia, India are transacting a lot over WhatsApp. We're actually seeing that rise a lot over here. So one of the things that I found very interesting when it comes to tools that are being built for marketplaces in Europe, we've seen a lot of conversational commerce type tools, which allow people to transact over WhatsApp.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because we don't do that in Europe at all. But I do remember reading a Substack at one point about the rise of WhatsApp, and it's a very significant shopping channel today.
It's a massive shopping channel, and it's interesting because one of the perspectives that we benefit at Prosus is that global perspective. It's like, hey, we have a business called, Meesho in India, which is a massive, massive business. And we've been part of that business for many years. And it started off basically as a means for people to sell on WhatsApp, for small businesses to transact on WhatsApp. And now has become one of the dominant, the largest e-commerce businesses in India, just off, using kind of social commerce as a channel. So it's something that we've been, and once we saw that, we're like, hey, does that exist in Europe? Is there something like that could exist in Europe? We haven't quite found that as a channel. Another company I actually liked, which is not a Prosus company, but I'm a fan of, and it comes back to the talent point. One of the things that I love about Europe, and we'll touch on this perhaps shortly as well, is the quality of, high quality technical talent that exists. And one business that I'm a really big fan of is called Photoroom out of France. And, one of the things that we have on a lot of our marketplaces is we have people taking pictures of either goods or restaurants taking pictures of food that are posted online in record numbers. And, Photoroom is developed in, AI first photo editing tool that allows people to instantly remove backgrounds or edit backgrounds. And when we think about AI tools that are aiding marketplaces, Photoroom is a great example of one that, a lot of our portfolio companies have been in discussions with to try and use. And there's been, they themselves have been incredibly successful.
Yeah, I remember it's not long ago that Canva were the only ones that could do decent background removal. Now it is quite proliferate, but Canva is definitely not built to service the small business owner unless it's for designing, full designs. But it doesn't integrate to anything. So I can imagine a big opportunity being there with all the AI tools that they're very much pioneering at Canva, but they're just not, fit for anything but a designer approach. So very interesting. Okay, we're covering a lot of ground on how AI is reshaping the marketplaces area, but I'd love to ask you about how then are you seeing AI reshaping shopping habits?
Let's break up, because these are all such interesting questions we could spend a ton of time on, and to ensure that people are along on the journey, let's maybe break up the shopping experience, the online shopping experience, into its components, right? So let's go all the way from onboarding to transaction, right? And everything in between. As it pertains to onboarding, we think about, targeted marketing, personalized UX. Those are two areas which on onboarding, it's, I experience myself, right? I got an email from Avant Arte this morning where, which is one of our portfolio companies, and I'm a customer of the platform, a very, very happy customer of the platform. And they're like, hey, Sandeep, this artist is coming out with a work based on something that you had similar. That's personalized UX, that's targeted marketing. That's a great way to bring people along the journey. And then let's talk about posting. Right, that's the next.
Let me just add to it. I completely agree on the opportunity set there, and I'm like, I am so annoyed with, I know I have so much stuff going out that is important for some people on my platform, but less for others, and I would wish that I had a very easy plug and play tool to allow me to say everyone who has not gone through a form and said I'm interested in marketplaces, but just the ones that have listened to all the episodes with the other marketplaces investors we've had on, that we would in Substack have an automatic tool that would just say, well, I'm going to push this directly or more specifically on WhatsApp as an example to those individuals. Like, it's so annoying that, that there's so many things that, I can only imagine what the agentic and the data-driven AI will allow us to do in just a handful of years. It's going to be incredible.
It's incredibly exciting about, imagining a world where we're able to get access to the things that we want in like a quicker way, a faster
even
way.
Without knowing, even without accessing it ourselves, right? But the tool says, yo, dude, you listen to this. I think you'd like to listen to this as well. And by the way, Andreas is also doing a hiking trip for people only in marketplaces. Maybe this is something you should consider, right?
For sure. And just like, I think that, another area, and probably not one we're going to get into detail on this call, but another area where Europe is leading though as well, which I'm also very excited about being part of, is on privacy, right? Because obviously there's those things go hand in hand, where it's like, but having people opt in and be like, hey, I listen to Andreas's podcast, I like marketplaces, I would love to hear more about some of this stuff. And that's what makes for a really, really interesting future ahead of us, for sure.
It's incredible. Tell me a bit about agents. How are you seeing agents move? Because it's quite like that's what we now consider the next stage of AI. Some would say we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's still early days, is the honest answer. It's still early days, but one of the things that we're seeing and we're thinking about is basically, how agents can help buyers go out and procure the best thing for them. If we talk about the entire kind of shopping habits that we were mentioning, if I can open up an app, or if I can open up a WhatsApp, for example, I'll give you a tangible example. I am currently in the market for some new running shoes, and I have it at the top of my list. I was like, I need to research which running shoes to go out and buy. And I just haven't gotten to it. And imagining a world where there's an agent that I can go out and task and go out and surface what are running shoes that I would actually go out and buy. That's interesting. I don't think that we're there yet. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, but I can totally see a universe in which that exists for buyers. The other where is for sellers, right? For sellers is like, hey, I'm, sitting in my office today. I've got all these things that I'd like to sell. I just don't have the time, even with a lot of the tech innovation that's out there. I don't have the time to kind of create listings, manage responses, manage postings. That can be a full-time job. And I can totally see a world in which agents can help with sellers. So I think that there's a ton that could help. Obviously, I may be misquoting here, but I think it was Bill Gates that mentioned that, the person that creates the complete virtual assistant will create, the next generational company. There was something along those lines that he mentioned. And I truly believe that to be the case. I truly believe that to be the case.
Yeah. The big question is whether that one is going to be like a bunch of different tools that we use. Like I have one in my email, I have one for, or it's one overarching one, all powered by OpenAI. If it was up to Bill Gates, I'm sure. I'd love to ask you, where do you see the most promising investment opportunities then when we're thinking about Europe's AI-driven marketplaces?
At the moment, I'm most excited by a lot of the tools that are coming out in Europe. The marketplaces themselves, the incumbents, they're sitting on data and they're trying to figure out which ways they can leverage their data to create a better experience. And traditional marketplaces with really strong network effects are very difficult to be dislodged, which is one of the reasons why we love investing in marketplaces, because once they get to some size and scale, they are delivering a superior customer proposition for all of the parties, all of the stakeholders. I think in Europe, one of the things that we're seeing is that there's just a lot of incredibly smart technical folks that are coming up with either, early agentic solutions. They're coming up with incredibly thoughtful ways to iterate on design. Superside is a good example. Photo Room's another good example. There's a lot in the tooling space that I think will help augment the marketplaces, the incumbent marketplaces that exist out there, especially as it pertains. I mean, the chatbots that we've seen in Europe have also been really, really interesting.
How do you think about, because marketplaces have a very unique dynamic in that, as you said, winner takes all market, they're very hard to dislodge. When you're then looking at tooling that sells into these platforms, they don't exhibit the same dynamics necessarily. Most likely, they're more ideal acquisition candidates for someone like Zalando or whatever, name your big marketplace. Do you see them getting these AI toolings for marketplaces having the same large outcomes as a marketplace would normally have, or do you see them, as more of supporting companies that in the end will likely be acquired or won't grow as big?
I think so. I think that there could be very large outcomes here, because if we think about it, you know, ultimately there are so many marketplaces all over the world. I mean, right now, just sitting here, I can list ones that everybody's heard of: Uber, DoorDash, Delivery Hero, Deliveroo. I mean, these
Yeah,
are
all the biggest, almost the biggest tech, all the biggest tech inventions over the last 10, 15, 20 years have all been marketplaces almost.
there have been so many. I mean, there have been so many of these marketplaces, and now imagine a company that is able to service a lot of these customers that are massive. I mean, multi-billion-dollar companies in their own right. I think that that would create a massive outcome. The question that I typically ask is, are you providing a service that delights your end customer, right? Is this something, and that will be typically evident in, retention metrics and customer and, customer feedback. But I think that there can be really large outcomes in this space for sure.
Yeah. I want to move to ask you a couple of questions about yourself as well, so we make sure the audience gets to know you. But I just want to, before then, ask you, where do you see us headed in Europe when we are considering AI-driven marketplaces? What should investors be on the lookout for?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity in Europe specifically. So again, decoupling marketplaces and, AI-driven marketplaces, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in Europe on understanding businesses that have a sustainable, a sustainable angle where Europe leads. I think for marketplaces, one of the big things is actually trust and safety. How do I know that, what I'm looking at, what I'm buying is truly what exists out there? And how can AI tools really help at that? Because that can be a quite manual intensive process to ensure trust and safety. I think in Europe specifically, one of the areas is understanding through the entire journey of, shopping, onboarding, posting, searching, browsing, trust, monetization, transaction. Where can there be tools that will deliver the highest ROI for the incumbent marketplaces? Where are there tools that can be built along those journeys? And that's honestly where I spend a lot of my time looking at companies in Europe, is what are the tools that will empower actually a lot of our incumbent businesses, right? Because we think that those can create really, really large outcomes. And that could be anything from, chatbots, that could be anything from smart routing, from image editing. Those are areas of work. And I think, as I mentioned, because these can be quite technical in nature to build, that's why I'm so excited about Europe, because of the strong access to technical talent that we have over here.
Yeah, and that is continuously the key characteristic that I hear mentioned about the European opportunity these days. Okay, now let's go to the person behind this voice that we've been hearing for a while. Sandeep, tell us a bit about yourself.
I've lived in London for the past 12 years, so I've been here for a while. I love Europe, and one of the reasons why I love Europe, I love living in Europe, I love working in Europe, is because of the diversity of thought, the diversity of culture, the diversity of opportunity. Any one day for me, I can meet founders from all different walks of life, building all different types of opportunities, which is really, really fascinating. I'm from the US, so I moved here from New York. I lived in India for a little bit of my life.
I did hear perfect pronunciation, or at least not the typical Western European pronunciation of Bangladesh.
Yeah, I'm privileged enough to have lived in enough parts of the world to really get the opportunity to enjoy some of the cultural experiences. And one of the things that I have learned through this, professional journey and personal journey that I think is important. Somebody asked me the other day, is like, what's your user manual? Like, how do you interact with people? How do you interact with founders? And one of the things that served me well is I view every meeting as an opportunity to learn something. I could see anybody, and everybody has come from a different set of circumstances, from a different background, and there's an opportunity to learn from some. Innovation can come from anywhere, which is one of the things that I love about this job.
Yeah, and that's why Europe is also incredible, because that is very much the mindset that you have to have if you're investing across Europe.
Which is why it's so fun. There could be innovation that comes out of Poland. There could be innovation that comes out of Copenhagen. Anywhere, which is so fascinating.
We are running up against the clock here, and you have 3 big learnings in venture, but I will actually want to skip those and go directly to some strongly held beliefs that you've had to change your mind on, because they are unusually interesting. So I want to ask you if you could list those. And the first one, being on fully remote culture can actually work. I love that, but it's definitely something that is quite controversial to say.
I think that building a business that's truly fully remote, where people don't have in-person interactions, I think it's really, really tough. I recognize the flexibility that, allowing people to work from home, especially those with family situations, entails. But as companies are training junior talent, most businesses are apprenticeship businesses, and having people that are there in person, I think that there are some businesses that I think can be fully remote, but I don't think that it's a playbook for every business. And it's something that I feel quite strongly about.
It's funny because you will find more European investors believing that fully remote can work than US investors. So that's a bit fun. Okay, another thing that you say, recaps can never work. So tell me a bit about this. Do you believe that recaps cannot work, or that they can work? And maybe add some context to those.
I used to believe that they could never work. But actually, we don't enter into a company, at least me personally, like, we're not looking to enter into a company in a recap scenario. However, the thought that they can never work actually isn't true. I've seen situations more recently pan out where they have worked. And the way that I think about it is that it's just resetting and realigning incentives, because actually what I'm a very strong believer of is alignment of incentives is incredibly important. And that actually goes to my next view, whereas you can solve valuation disconnects with structure, which we've seen, we saw in kind of in the heyday. We're actually seeing some of those conversations right now, where there are companies that have like pretty high valuations that don't want to maybe necessarily take a lower mark, and people are getting creative ways. I just have a really strong belief, and I've been against this in the past. I have a really strong belief around misaligned incentives. I think people are adults having a conversation around, hey, that's not the valuation that it should be. This is what the valuation should be. Solving around that with structure, which creates a set of parties that, in the shareholder base that have different incentives, is just not a situation that I love.
And you have the same comment on valuation disconnects, that you can solve those via structure, and that can actually be done. I actually think so. 2 things. One, I think that we've had an uptime where everyone thought that, and to be fair, in 2021, if you did have to do a recapitalization, something was up. Now you're maybe just another company like everyone else and trying to make things work. So in this market, good companies can be hit by it and need a recap. But then I would say another thing, which is that as we're seeing everything move a bit more into deep tech, we're also seeing the market move a bit later, because there's more tech development and more risk on the tech side. And if there's anything that any real deep tech investor will tell you is, the first round is the easiest round, but the second and the third and the fourth that are all almost bridge rounds, those are difficult. And that's where you see whether people are real deep tech investors or not, whether they can write those checks and correctly assess the risk in those rounds. So I do think that recaps and bridge rounds and everything in between is definitely something that we are going to see more of happen across the spectrum in venture. Sandeep, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Andreas, thank you so much for having me. It was such a treat.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. This episode comes to you by the support of our partners. Portfolio IQ by Synaptic. Portfolio IQ is the most effective way to track your portfolio. It pulls data from all sources: board decks, financials, MIS sheets, forms, emails, everything, and creates a true single source of truth for your portfolio data. With Portfolio IQ, you can track all the metrics that matter, not just the standard metrics. All metrics are reviewed by a team of certified accountants. You'll get 100% accuracy. Not sure about a number? Just click on it to see the exact cell in the document it came from. Portfolio IQ also adds a layer of standardization to make the data comparable and useful for benchmarking, valuations, and reporting. All of this is as simple as forwarding an email. Zero added work for your fund or your portfolio companies. Portfolio monitoring that you'll fall in love with. Go to synaptic.com/portfolio IQ. That's synaptic.com/portfolio IQ. The good folks at Synaptic will be happy to give you a no-cost trial.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.